This week we got Dr. Ronald Taylor. Dr. Ronald Taylor, the former superintendent, did a lot of work in the New Jersey area. Multi-generational, talk about honors with kids, all type of stuff. Great to hear his perspective around education, culture, and the community. Let's go. Drop the beat.
Unlearned Unlimited. Unlearned Unlimited.
Welcome to Unlearned Unlimited. My name is Dr. Sito Narcisse and my co-host
Tatiana Echevarria.
What a show. We got a banger for you today. We have the Dr. Ronald Taylor in the house. I know it's like the Ohio State University.
It's the Dr. Ronald
I should
Taylor.
say the Morehouse College, right? Because he's a Morehouse man. Dr. Ronald Taylor in the house. Dr. Taylor, great educator, done tremendous things throughout his career, wrote a big book, which I'm going to let him talk about. But we are super excited to have you on our show, Unlearned and Unlimited, to get that raw truth. How you doing, Doc?
I feel great. I feel great. Honored to join you and honored to be a part of this phenomenal experience.
Oh, man, listen, we talked about wanting to get innovators in education.
Amen.
Remember, T, we were talking like, who are the people to get? Now, people don't know, like, we have a list of folks, then we kind of go through and say, who can we engage, et cetera, et cetera. Your name came up because, the interesting thing was like the way that you come into different type of mediums, whether it's talking about education one way around kids that take like higher level courses or multi-generational stuff, all that stuff we thought was really interesting, especially in the time that we're in around AI, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're going to get into all of that and also talk about your new book that you wrote, which we're super excited to hear about. We want to get into all that. So let's go ahead and kick it from there. Tatiana, how you want to start this off?
Well, I believe that while we know a little bit about you, it's important for our audience and our listeners to get some context and background. Now, you can start way back to when you were born. You can talk about your professional journey. You can fill us in with anything in between. But
wait, Doc, tell her put some respect on your name. You gotta be like Birdman, but put some respect on my name. See?
I mean, you want to give us, baby Ronald Taylor. You want to give us Morehouse Ronald Taylor. You want to, give us the tea. Tell us a little bit about you and specifically, how you got to the space that you are in now. So yeah, turning it over to you, Dr. Ronald Taylor.
Oh, thank you so much. So, gosh, it's been a long journey and so much to share. And I think when I retired from education, formal public education about a year ago, and the experience that I had, the threads that I saw that traveled with me from 2.5 years old to 51 years old, it inspired me to write a book because I felt like when I did my research, no one had really written a book that captured how educational equity can really be a thread through the life of someone who is in my age, right? Who, how it impacted the schools that I went to, and the schools that I went to impacted the friends that I had, and the friends that I've had influenced my journey and the different programs that I was able to get into and how I got into them. But just for those who haven't heard of me, and it's probably most folks here, my hometown is Detroit, Michigan. I was born there. Yep. D-Town, the D, yeah. And I'm still, even though I haven't lived in Detroit since I was 12, I'm still a huge Detroit guy. I still a Lions fan, a University of Michigan fan.
You had a good football year last year, didn't you?
Yeah. Listen, my friends try to joke me that I'm just a Lions fan and we're living high on the hog. My entire life, the Lions have sucked, right? But I've still been a Lions fan, so I'm a committed person. My family moved from Detroit when I was about 12 years old or so. We went to Atlanta, Georgia, and my mom is from South Georgia, so a lot of her siblings were also in Atlanta, and so I went to high school and college in Atlanta. I was an education major. Some of the interesting pieces. Morehouse College in Atlanta.
Morehouse,
the house, right? And I had a girlfriend at that time at Spelman, and she went to Harvard. So I
Okay.
chased her up to Boston, and I taught in Boston public schools for a year, and then
Okay.
went to the DC area, and I was a teacher, assistant principal, and principal for about 15 years in the DC area, and I really got so inspired from DC because again I was in Detroit and I was in Atlanta, and I'd never really seen a place where states were touching each other and
Yeah.
different districts and different states, and it was just really interesting. And so that kind of again inspired me through some of my research around the different impacts of facilities on student achievement, because some of the buildings that I was working in were just such different levels of you know of the quality of the building, and seeing how kids were performing academically during that time. It was just super interesting to me to try and see if there was really an impact that could be caused from the particular building facility, and how kids were in there every day. Look, all of us, everywhere we go, it impacts us.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm the kind of person that, I have to straighten up my bed before I leave for the day, because that's the
Mm-hmm.
first
Mhm.
thing, so I saw those connections and I found those connections in my dissertation. Um, and I had a fantastic superintendent in DC, Dr. Clifford Janey. And Dr.
Mhm.
Janey came to my school. He saw the work that we were doing. He saw how we were really, this is early 2000s.
Yeah,
The
I was gonna say
first,
because he was in a couple of cities, wasn't he? I know he was he in Newark, New Jersey too, and I can't remember the other
yep,
place he was in.
he
Yeah,
was
yeah,
in Newark. He was in Roxbury. He was in Boston. But
yeah.
when
That's
when
right.
he was in yeah when he was in DC, um, he left and went to Newark, and he recruited me to be one of his assistant superintendents. So that's how I ended up
Wow.
in New Jersey. In New
Hey,
Jersey,
so Doc, I'm a little confused. When I say I'm confused, I missed it. So you followed this girl to Harvard, and
To
then after
Boston.
Harvard, did
To
you follow?
Boston.
You went to another girl? What is it? Was she a part of the
Wow, you're
education
doing
space?
too
Or?
much.
No,
You're
no. I'm just
oh, I thought you were trying to
so
ask me if you're following another girl.
no, no, no. I mean, everybody goes one place or another. I'm just saying, like, the transitions is through network, right? So,
well, so
I won't share your secret if you don't want me to. I won't share.
no, no, no. Listen, it's in my new book, right? One of the things I write in my book, right? I write about school equity, and I write about that type of stuff, but I also write about how um, we personally experience um, equity, and how we
Yeah.
personally, as a black man, I had never really experienced situations where I was giving preference over someone else. And so
Mm,
my girlfriend at the time, again, she went to Spelman, she went to Harvard and got a master's degree. I went
okay.
to Boston, I taught there. She was from DC and I had always loved DC. So after Boston, we went to DC, and we were
Mhm.
looking for teaching positions. And I got a
Okay.
teaching position just like that, right?
Okay.
She had better scores, and GPAs in undergrad. She had a master's from Harvard, but it was way more difficult for her to get a job than me. And
Interesting.
I had just never experienced that before. And when I was talking about it, she said, having a black man in the elementary school as a teacher, you know, you are going to be, gobbled up quickly by principals who see the value in that. And that was the
Right.
first time that I had really remembered experiencing privilege, right? Seeing
Okay.
seeing that I had a privilege that, I didn't earn, right? She was the higher the higher educated person. She had a master's degree, etc. And again, we ended up breaking up not too far after that, but that
I
that
don't want to
was
put
a
your business out there, Doc. I don't want to put you.
and look, my wife knows all about it.
Okay.
It's okay.
Good Dr. Teller's an this for your wife. P.S. Good, upstanding citizen.
Wholesome Omega Man, wholesome Omega Man, right? No, and so with that's just part of that journey, right? Where
Yeah.
I just remember that was a significant piece, and seeing that, oh, I'm wanted in this space.
Yeah.
That
Right.
was
Right.
significant for me, right? And Dr. Janey was significant as well. He awarded my school the first beating the odds school in Washington D.C.
Oh,
We
wow.
had yeah, when I inherited the school, I had the pleasure of being principal Emory Elementary School in Northeast Washington. It had a real history of some challenges, and we were able to build a fantastic team, and we ended up being the number 7 ranked school in DC,
Oh, wow.
based on our test scores. And I talk about that because just again showing the journey and how where you land, you're not going to be the person who's the superhero of the school. You can build great teams. You can have that commitment that really becomes infectious and that enthusiasm. And I talk about that and my journeys as a superintendent as well in my book. And I think that one of the things that I try to focus in on with that journey of equity is you have to have the courage to recognize it, right? That courage is underrated in the work that we do sometimes, that you have to realize that there are tough decisions and tough conversations, but what's your commitment level? And do you have the courage to really stick to it, knowing that doing the right thing is always a time to do the right thing?
You know what I find interesting, Tatiana? I was just thinking about as Doc, you're talking about this whole notion around gender in schools, right? I mean, I would argue that still happens today when they see a male teacher for elementary, right? Because most of the time you'll see in elementary schools are mostly female teachers, right? And to see the dynamic on how women are women is perceived to be in one position, men are perceived to be in another position. And the reason I bring that up is because sometimes you will hear people talk about issues not from a gender standpoint, but always from a race standpoint or from a socioeconomic standpoint. But gender plays a whole lot of intricacies in these jobs and
Well, I
views.
mean, I remember to your point, when I went through my elementary education program at the Florida State University, we all can't make great choices, but my cohort had approximately 30 people, and again, it's elementary education. And in my cohort, I was I was one of the Black and brown. We had less than 5 in that program, and we only had 1 male that was in the elementary education cohort. We only had 1.
And those numbers, would you say, Doc, I know you've been around the country now doing a lot of stuff, but those numbers still persist. Is that correct?
Oh, 100%, 100%. I don't remember having a male teacher or a black male teacher in elementary school, and even in the middle school grades outside of the PE teacher, right? And
Mm,
I think that that is definitely something that's persisting. And there's lots of research probably about why, and some would say, oh, because teachers have a stagnant salary cap, right? They're on many
Mhm.
states, many districts. They're on a pre-negotiated salary
mhm,
step scale, and can that person be the head of household, right? Can that person
mhm,
successfully be a head of household? And traditionally men are seen that way, and so there's
Yes.
all kind of research on what that might mean, and how we got there. But I can remember that those are some of my favorite years in education, being the elementary teacher and being in schools where that was valued, and there were other folks in there, other men who became friends of mine for life, who were
mhm.
also black male teachers in those schools, and we created affinity clubs and all type of things based on our love for what we did. And so it was just a powerful, powerful piece.
You
That's
know,
awesome.
I was just,
I love that. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, my nephew had a male teacher last year, and I
mhm.
was beyond thrilled that, I mean, and
That was his first one, right?
that's his first one as far as I can remember.
Yeah.
And granted, he's gone to school in Florida and in Louisiana as well, but I was thrilled about that. And then I went to his meet the teacher, and the teacher across the hall is also a male.
Mm,
And I think that is the most that I've seen in my recent years for an elementary school. A lot more traditional to see them in secondary placements. I think across the board,
mhm.
where there's like specializations in like math or
Yeah.
science
Yeah.
and things of that nature. But I mean, I was beyond giddy that he was able to just have someone that looked, it was, he's a biracial kid, my nephew, but he at least saw someone that was the same gender as him, right? Wasn't the same race he was, but still it was pretty awesome to see.
The thing I find interesting is I was just thinking as you were making those comments about the role of education now, right? Because you're going to hear people talk about, technologies changing this stuff even more rapid. Workforce, getting people in the workforce, that's another piece, right? You have all these sets of elements, but I don't know if people understand that schools are a part of communities and communities are a part of schools, right? And so, and they, what's been tough in the education space is that there's a belief that, you send the kid to school, they're going to learn everything at the school, right? But there's this intertwine between the community and school piece that kids have to learn all these other elements, I think, in order to succeed into these spaces of, how to do better with technology for a job, how to do all these, I call them the unspoken curriculum, right? And so as you were talking about the equity work that you've been working on with all the things you've been doing, we're going to get into asking you some questions around what you think around honors and advanced placement, all that stuff, because we know you've worked in a lot of those spaces. Where do you see the role, I guess, from Tatiana, the perspective we were talking about? What's the role of education now? I mean, it's ever changing. You got all these new elements. You got more people defining what that means, right? You got all these different contexts, right? And like, help us to unlearn. Like, right? That's why we call this Unlearned Unlimited. Help us to unlearn the stuff. You're like, listen, I know this is what the people tell you and stuff. This is what really goes on.
Yeah. So I think that for me, being an educator and thinking back through my career, such a great question. And I remember getting evaluations from folks who were above me when I was a teacher, and they consistently wrote on there I was a natural teacher, right? That I was naturally engaging my kids. And what I remember, no one ever told me to do this, right? But I remember meeting my class as a teacher on the first day of school and saying to them, "Man, you guys are so lucky. Congratulations, you're in the best class in the school." Right? And they would look at me with these big eyes like, yes, how lucky am I to be in the best class in the school? And that self-esteem moment when we would have disciplinary issues, even small ones, we would talk about, remember, we're in the best class in the school, reminding them of our excellence, right? Even if we had the third day of school, we haven't accomplished anything, but but putting into them as the adult in front of them, engaging them that we are fantastic, we are great. And as a principal, when we would start our school day, I revamped the school with some great folks, and we would welcome the kids at the front door. And then the first day of school, we would teach them what we would call our creed, right? And it was my heritage. And so it would go, my heritage is one of greatness, but I know that I can do more. I must never do less than those who came before. What my mind can conceive and my heart can believe, I can achieve. And so the kids would have a little bit of trouble the first week or so learning it. But by the end of the school year, they were rocking the walls every day with that creed. And we would talk to them when we had behavior challenges or whatever it may be about the Emory way, right? Well, that's not the Emory way, because the Emory way is fantastic. It's phenomenal. It's outstanding, because that's who we are. And I think that having folks, teaching kids to have that belief in themselves. The teachers came to me early on and said, "Hey, we're standing here while the kids are telling us how great they are, listening. We feel like we're not a part of it. Can we say something back to the kids?" I said, "Of course." And so the teachers wrote, and they began to say, "We will teach each child as if they are our own." Right. So I didn't come up with that. I didn't give that to them to say, but that's the motivation so it became cyclical, right? That us believing in ourselves. And I think that that's one of the things that I think about the community bleeding into the schools and the schools becoming a part of the community is that we underestimate how important the esteem that our kids and the belief that our kids and our staff and community have in our schools, right? Believing that the schools is a fantastic place. The schools can be a fun place. It can be a place where my kids getting all that they need to be successful in life, even if it's in what's considered a depressed community. And that's where I was. I would yearn to be in those spaces that were challenging because I grew up in that kind of space. So I think that maintaining the enthusiasm, the belief, even in the dark weeks of February and March when we're back from winter break, we've been around for a while, the sun's not coming up and staying up as long, keeping that enthusiasm and belief and commitment to our belief in what we do and how well we do it is just so paramount for
Mhm.
kids.
Mhm.
I think that we underestimate, um, you know, I put in my book a little bit about the studies that have been done about kids when they're given blood pressure tests, right? Little kids that they sometimes have elevated blood pressure and health challenges that are based on, some research says based on the challenges that they're experiencing every day outside of school, right? And so trying to make it a place of joy and a place of celebration and a place that we're proud to be in, and having the belief that we're doing things that are going to be successful based on the research and the work that we put into it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think too, we talk a little bit about how much it is important and imperative that there's a belief, especially in schools that serve children that experience poverty, that may not be meeting grade level standards and things of that nature, that there has to be a belief from the individuals that touch them that they can achieve. Because if those individuals don't believe that, if they don't have that sense that these kids can learn and they will learn, then more than likely those children will not achieve themselves
Mm.
because there's not someone that's in that space that is pushing them
That's right.
to do those things and that believes that they can do those things. So I want to tap into that a little bit more as we talk about community, and you started delving into that. So you definitely got a sense of community going to Morehouse, right? I can imagine like that is a community in its own. And of course you're part of the 1911 gang, we know that
he made a different type of choice. Everybody got a bad choice they make in life, but I won't hold that against
that's subjective,
how it is as a Kappa brother.
So you innately formed community in both your school choice and then joining a fraternity, which we know that also creates a different experience in itself while you're in school. So how does this background and like this sense of community that you created and or walked into, because I believe Morehouse, right, you walk into like a sense of community in that way too, how did that inform your approach to leadership? And you shared a little bit about that with creeds and things of that nature, but also like your commitment to educational equity.
Yeah, so I would even go back further than that, right? I attended Frederick Douglass High School in Atlanta, Georgia. And I remember, I was new to Atlanta, right? I had come to visit family, but it was different for me. And I remember in eighth grade, in middle school, we had to select our high school, and it was usually a neighborhood placement system. But one of the things that I write about that is just so forward thinking, this is back in 1987, right? That there was a system in place for you to take a test to apply to be in a magnet program so that you could go to any high school in the city. And so I had taken that test, and instead of going to my neighborhood high school, I went to Douglass, which was across town. And part of going to Douglass was that I had to take two buses and two trains in Atlanta.
Wow.
And so part of that program is they would give you bus tokens every week, right?
Okay.
And so someone innovatively, someone had the innovative thought to ensure that letting you attend the school is just part of it, right? How do I know that you're going to get there? And so when I got there, one of the things that I ended up being a part of was ROTC. And
Mm-hmm.
I was in ROTC, for 3 years, and I was a drill team captain, and we won awards and all these things. And so I shared that I was just hanging out with my friends. I knew I was going to college, but we hadn't decided where. We were still doing college visits and tours and things. And the commander, the adult who was in charge of us, who was a Navy officer, he walked through us and he just said, "Hey, who scored 1,000 on the SAT?" And I
Mm.
sheepishly raised my hand. A few others did. He said, "Follow me." And we went to his office and he had some documents there. And we walked out of there with acceptance into Morehouse and a full ride, right? That
Oh,
there was a
Wow.
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 partnership with our high school and with ROTC, with the AUC, the Atlanta University Center. And that afternoon, when I was just there with my friends and answered that question, that that moment changed my life. And so when you talked about community and school connections and expectations and all those things, you know, you take that lesson back 4 years to when I took that
Mhm.
test and applied for that high school. And that high
Wow.
school also had kids in it who were not in the magnet program. The magnet program was just a
Mhm.
part of it, right? So, but just
Mhm.
that that experience just really helped me to see just how important it was, the folks who you were around, right? And I have a
Mhm.
daughter. I talk to her about this all the time. The friends that I had who were a part of that, some of them are CEOs now and attorneys and things like that, um, who are not from rich areas. This is a public school. This is not a private space, and
Mhm.
so so that experience in ROTC, I ended up tearing um, a ligament in my knee and some another injury with sports, so I wasn't able to continue ROTC throughout college. But I had a full ride, and I had access to one of the best colleges in the world, through the relationships that were part of being at that school that I attended. And that just has always been a nugget for me. The enthusiasm that I had as a part of that was given to me by those who were there, and just the flippant kindness and joy that officer did, just asking us that question, right? Asking us,
Yeah.
he didn't put us through a long application process. He just had a question, and I'm sure that equity effort that Morehouse put in with my high school, Frederick Douglass, did not only impact me, right? There are lots of kids who had that pipeline entry and scholarship that it changed their lives.
Well, and I think that goes back to partnerships, right? We
Yeah,
talk
that's
a
right.
lot about
That's right.
partnerships.
That's right.
We talk a lot about access to specific resources, which in our communities is not always, the case. And by that partnership and through access, you talked about just the bus tokens. If you didn't have access to
That's right.
that,
You wouldn't have been going.
how would you have been able
Yeah,
to
that's right.
put and obviously I don't know entirely your story if your mom or dad could have gotten you to school or that whatnot. But the reality is that for some kids without that access, to that resource, they wouldn't have been able to.
You know what I want to touch on something we talked about in terms of like culture and how you feel. I think it's interesting. I know we're warping into these different spaces, but I want to ask you something that's going to sound real controversial. So let me just preface that before we start. Okay. And I want to just also frame it in terms of what the research says, right? So right now it shows in the research in the United States that our kids compared to other countries have a lot of confidence, right? Or feel good about themselves, right? But they're lacking in these other academic areas that lead to workforce spaces, right? And so there's a whole lot of spaces in that. And the reason I bring that up is because in one of your comments, you talked about how you felt in this environment, in this community that whether you intentionally or unintentionally built towards your success, right? One of the things I wonder a lot about, and the reason we wonder around this is because we talk to a lot of different people on the ground in education, different states, different cities, different colors, all this stuff. And we always hear this thread that people talk about, with as much as people talk about now around standardized tests and they got to perform this way and they got to perform all that, that there's this notion around culture and how you feel as a part of a predictor to your success, right? And the reason I want to ask this question is because we wonder that, would you say that how you feel is based more on, if you can quantify it, has more to do statistically about your socioeconomics that you come from, or is it based on your race? And the reason I ask it that way is because sometimes you see race and socioeconomics are intertwined when people are making comments about who can achieve, not achieve, right? And what we have found and seen is that the lower the socioeconomic the child is, doesn't matter if they're white, black, Latino, whatever the grouping is, they need more attention around feeling they can accomplish something to achieve the next step into a space in their K-12 journey or even their college journey, right? Than kids who come from already resource have and all that.
Regardless of their race.
Right. And what you hear when you talk to a child that comes from a space that does not always, is not always real resource, they get into those spaces, if they're a smart kid or they've done well, they get into a place with other higher socioeconomic kids that are well resourced and those things. And they're sitting there with those peers and they ask themselves, do I belong here? Even if they may have the same test scores and all that, but they base that based on where they come from, right? Whatever that looks like. And I don't know if you understand how I'm asking that question, but the reason I'm asking that is because I wanted us to demystify this whole notion and ask, you're asking, is it race or is it socioeconomic status that that you feel makes more of an impact on what happens throughout schooling or after schooling for a child? Or your achievement, right? Okay. Right. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about that?
So I think that socioeconomic status is just huge, right? I think that it shows and is shown throughout a lot of research is that there is a correlation between socioeconomic status and race, but it's not always a one-to-one correlation. And in the work that I did around integrating schools, believe it or not, in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 22, integrating schools, we based it on socioeconomics and not race. And one of the reasons, even though we monitored the outcomes from a racial perspective, race was not a determining factor on placement. And that's really important because that was deemed illegal by, gosh, this is years ago, through a Seattle program that was doing it. And it went all the way up to, the highest courts, that using race as a determination for school placement was inappropriate. And so we use socioeconomic status, but we monitored the impact on race, which is a really important thing to delineate when you're discussing this stuff. And what we found is that when kids were placed along with their higher socioeconomic peers, the outcomes showed that it helped everyone, right? That was one of the things that we talked about when you can imagine, this is jumping around a little bit, when you're giving people placements of the schools that they're going to attend, that can become very controversial, right? If when one of the things that I used to do during that process, the triple I is what we called it. I met with realtors to help them understand our school placement, and that they should not be selling houses to folks and promising them that the school down the street, the school next door, it's a school that they're going to be going to, because our district was committed to creating school enrollment that was similar school to school to school, right? And um, part of that was ensuring that there was a balance in the socioeconomic patterns in each of the schools. And I think that it's very significant what your parents experience when they were in school really impacts what you view as your level of success that's possible in school. And so part of that is what we use as well in trying to create an algorithm for school placement that was going to be balanced across the community. We also included um, parent school achievement and also parent socioeconomic level as well, because that is just such an important determinant of what kids are going to view as their possibilities in school. Same thing when it came to the high school folks, for those kids who are going into the most difficult and challenging courses, those students who are choosing to be a part of it versus those students who are choosing not to, even though they have the ability to be successful in those spaces. Why is that happening? Why are they not selecting those most rigorous courses that can give them college credit in high school when they have performed really well in other courses? Why is that? And so that was some of the work that we did.
Wow. So that was a perfect transition because now let's talk AP.
How about that?
And the advanced placement is quite a taboo topic, and especially in the state of Florida, let's say that. So that's a perfect transition for us to talk about that. So I have a little statistic here that we pulled. So it says nationally, about 52% of students in advanced placement coursework. And for those that are unfamiliar with advanced placement, that allows students to take a course at the high school level that gives them the opportunity to earn college credit if they do well on the end of year exam. I think they're still called College Board, right?
Yeah, College Board. Yeah.
But it says that 52% of those students that are taking the courses are white, while only 10% of them are Black. Now, obviously, that's a pretty statistical gap there in terms of representation. So, in your opinion, what is that single most, and not your opinion, but the research that you've done, what is the single most reason, like you said, that even if a child does potentially have the qualities, whether that's grit, persistence, determination,
right,
that they can do this course, why are Black students so underrepresented in taking those courses?
So some of the work that we did when I was hired as a superintendent, my second superintendency in North New Jersey, during that interview process with the board, they shared very frankly that they were worried because their elementary schools were so different from one another when it came to the enrollment, right? That there were some schools that had 75, 80% free and reduced lunch, and some that had 15% or 10%, because the parts of the community were different. But if you're just on a where you are enrolled, you go to school basis, um, it's obviously going to create that, right? And their second concern was that the entire school community and all those who had been engaged at the high school level knew that the third level of the high school buildings were the AP courses. And even though the school was only about, gosh, probably 45% white and 30% Black or so, it was almost all white on that floor. And that it was discussed, you know, as the private school within the school. And they didn't want that. And it had been 20 to 30 years, as long as AP courses had existed, that design organically occurred at the high school level, right?
Wow.
And so, and they hired me and wanted me to really address that. And so, when I had done, again, being a superintendent is a tough enough job, But when you're looking at generational challenges like that, challenges that are historic, right? They
Mhm.
persist with the stats that you just said, and in this district they did the same thing. Um, I was looking for someone or some district that had some places that had been successful, and I really only found one or two programs that had, proven documented success with addressing that AP enrollment piece. Um, and I also, really engaged the community with forums to talk about this stuff because this is not a singular person's decision, right? You want to really talk to people about what they think and what they
Yeah,
fear.
and and
And
and you didn't
yeah,
you don't wanna get fired. No, no, no. Let's call the truth, right? Like, here's what we see all the time, right? Like, when you have these advanced classes, don't advance you, and if it's an integration of a school with black, white, Latino, all that, white kids are always up here, black and brown kids are always. I mean, I rarely see. I don't know if you guys can show me, but I rarely seen a lot of parts of the country where if it's an integrated school where the white kids are not at the upper level.
Mm-hmm.
hmm
I rarely see that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's bad about it is then they ask you to go do these things knowing by design, right? These pathways were created from the elementary level, right?
right,
And so this is why, I won't get my soapbox between AP and dual enrollment, right? Because I'm a big believer in like it's access to all kids, no matter who it is. I think kids should try these courses and have no blocking them in any of these opportunities. But I bring this up because I think it's an impossible task for a superintendent. So now you got to go and make everybody feel good, right? To go tackle something that they not only create, but they don't really want to actually change. Because if you change that, you upset the apple cart and the whole design. I mean, tell me, Ronald, you tell me when I'm wrong, right? Tell
no,
me when I'm
you're not wrong. I'm just more naive, right? So,
wrong.
like, I,
And, and your strategy is what strategy, Doc? It's the strategy that every superintendent that is lived in that seat long enough do. And you have to do it. Like I would
right,
tell a superintendent, you go into a place that is integrated, you got to be clear, like race, class, and all those things persist and people are biased. And it's not really just a school thing. I personally think it's how our country's designed because in most cities, cities are segregated by neighborhoods. People don't want to say that.
I mean,
Pick a Chicago,
but I mean
pick
that
a
hasn't
Detroit.
changed for years upon years upon years. I mean,
And
you have what they called white flight at one point in time. In our history, where communities started. Certain individuals started moving into communities, so then certain individuals start leaving communities.
like churches are like that, right?
So you spoke to stakeholders, right? You engaged other individuals to kind of maybe attempt to problem solve. I think that's the best way that I can say that. What transpired from there?
yeah. So, just to fast forward a bit, right? So I had two buckets. Yeah, I have the elementary schools that are obviously segregated. The state of New Jersey is being threatened with a monumental lawsuit because we've been told that we're the sixth most segregated state in the union. And then we have the high school level where it's understood that these most rigorous courses are segregated, right? So those
Right,
two
right.
buckets. This is 2019, and so we approached this with the symposium, right? And over 1,000 people came out. Many came to hear my plan to address this, but that's not what we did. We talked about it, right? So I brought professors from colleges. I brought legal legal folks to talk about and
Build,
present
build
and
argument. That's
share.
right. That's right.
Yeah, and we also, what I did, I presented the data because for those who are parents, that you usually don't know what other schools look like. You know what
That's right.
your school looks like, right? You go to school every day, then you go to work. And so when I presented the differences in the enrollment of the elementary schools, the gas filled the auditorium. This is a place that's considered very progressive, right?
Right,
They were
right.
shocked. They did not know that the schools were that different. were such a significant difference. And then when we shared the AP courses in that enrollment, the same thing. But when I was looking for folks who have been successful with this, the one that we landed on was equal opportunity schools, which is
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
a group out of Seattle who
Hmm.
specialize in this. And so we brought them in for a year of just learning and engaging. And we saw for the first time in the history of that district very positive and substantial movement in the enrollment of those AP courses. And I do work with EOS now, so it's not a commercial for them, but the work that we did, it started with the people, right? Talking to the teachers and the guidance counselors and the principals, and all getting on the same wave when it comes to why are kids who can do this work, who should be interested, not going. Talking with those kids, having groups of kids to talk about why they don't select those courses, and then beginning to place them in the following years, and removing those glass ceilings, right? Sometimes districts have stuff in place that doesn't make any sense, right? For this kid to get to the AP course, a certain teacher has to give them a recommendation. Why? Right?
Right.
Why? Or this kid has to test
Just
to
give the
score.
course. That's right.
Right, right. And so, um, within 3 or 4 years, we had a great plan for our elementary schools. I was presenting at the state legislature, at the state house, just sharing because there was this huge lawsuit that was looming over the entire state, and we had come up with innovative approaches that were showing success at the elementary level. So much so that the board asked me to then apply that algorithm that we adopted to the middle school level, right? Because the middle school was just as segregated, and it went well, but it also becomes controversial, right? Yeah.
Has it changed? Like, so, I mean, has that place gotten better, and has those numbers made huge shifts after you've been gone?
So I would say the challenge came, um, the biggest challenge came when changes in the board happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
People live in communities and don't understand, may not understand how board elections work, right? You usually don't get folks who run. Well, let me preface that. Many times you don't get people to run for the board who are happy with the school district, right?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's folks who want change, right? They run because
Yes.
they don't like it. And so,
Right.
part of what the board that hired me, those 9 people who were really gung ho and approved all the work that we did, they began to dwindle off, right? Those
Yeah.
9 people turned into 9 different people who wanted something different. And then, um, same thing happens with many school districts. When the board changes, the priorities change, especially around
That's
COVID
right.
and those things. So my programs that I left, they all stayed intact, but I don't know if they've changed. I've heard whispers that there's been wants to change those algorithms that people. One thing that I believe in as a leader, especially with this kind of work, that we said and made part of our policy, that we don't give exceptions, right? Like if this is your placement, this is your placement. That's it. We
Hmm.
can't give exceptions because the folks who are the most affluent will also be the ones who get the most exceptions. And our
Hmm.
and we had gosh, probably probably had every year 20 to 30 folks who requested an exception from their placement, and every single one was turned down with my signature with a letter about why we can't give exceptions. And so, even when lawsuits happen and things like that from folks who were really affluent, who really wanted to change the schools that their kids went to, um, they lost because
Hmm.
it's the school district's determination of where you go to school. And so, again, all that stuff I believe is still in place. I know EOS is still doing work there and now also working towards the middle schools, but it's a tough fight. It's a tough fight to maintain, especially for those who believe that they are above the rule of the school district.
I mean, and I think that's also, we just had another guest that talked about the politics behind the school board, and also shared, which I thought was quite interesting, about the quality of individuals that are also running to be a part of school boards. And you brought up a great point regarding, oftentimes the individuals that end up running for the school board are, and I shouldn't, and maybe oftentimes I may not use that term, but individuals sometimes who decide to run are those that are disgruntled and unhappy, and may not always have enough context about what's going on, and how actual operations go, and just the truth behind doing the work. So I thought that was interesting. You mentioned that. So in your work, and you worked with an organization to try to kind of break that glass ceiling and allow students to be further exposed to advanced courses. Why do you think it is so important at the end of the day for these individuals to have exposure to AP or honors courses or advanced work? Why does it even matter? Because I took several, and I can't tell you I passed all of them, but and I also have individuals that I know that didn't take that level of coursework and are still extremely successful. So why does it matter?
So to me, from my perspective, I think that having access to the most rigorous courses, um, it's a civil right, right? It's it's a place where students can enter into a realm that's supposed to be the most challenging realm available to any high school student in our country, right? And part of what they should, and again, there's the argument between dual enrollment and AP. To me, they both are great, right? Being able
Mhm.
to go somewhere, if I'm a student from an impoverished family and I can take AP or dual enrollment courses, the likelihood of me going to college skyrockets. The likelihood of me being successful in college also skyrockets. Um, Me understanding that I am as good as everyone else in
That's right.
this
That's right.
course,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
everyone else around the country who's taking this course. It doesn't matter where I'm in school. If I'm in Mississippi, I'm in New Orleans, I'm in Detroit, I'm in New Jersey, I'm engaging with the same curriculum as all the folks taking this course around the country. I think that those things um, truly do build self-esteem in students. And the fact that I am leaving high school with college courses already under my belt shows that, from my perspective, it raises my expectations of myself when I get to college. And thinking about those all those high school graduations that we all attended when the kids had their cords on and the
Yeah.
decorative all that decorative regalia showing what
Yeah.
they've done, who also sees that are the younger siblings, right? It raises
Yes.
the expectation of everyone who is engaging with that student, showing that not only did they achieve it, but it's possible, right? I,
Mm.
I, I I share a little bit in my book about how I became a principal. When I was in school, elementary, middle, and high, all of my principals were, 50, 60, 70 years old. I knew I wanted to be a principal, but I expected to be one at 50, 60, or 70 years old. But
Yeah.
when I was at teacher orientation in PG County at 23 years old, a guy walked by me who looked like me, but his tag said principal. And I just stopped him because I just couldn't. It just blew my mind that someone who looked so close to my age could be a principal, and that I probably scared him. But he gave me a few minutes. He gave me a few minutes and told me about it, right? And he gave me
Yeah.
he gave me time that changed my life. It changed the trajectory of me as a person. He told me some of those stories, like, you want to be a principal, go talk to your principal and take some things off their desk, right? Like, volunteer for some stuff. And I ended up being a vice principal by 27, right? And a principal before 30. And
Yeah.
because of that interaction, that engagement. So just talking back to the AP courses and dual enrollment, spreading that language throughout the community that might already have other challenges, you can't underestimate the impact that that could do.
Well, and then there's just more access to those courses because I was even thinking about I did international baccalaureate in high school, but there is not the same amount of access to that program as there is to AP or advanced courses in schools.
You know, we talk about when we started this podcast, we said, hey, we wanted to have something where we create that we talk about education and culture, right? Because we sat in a lot of spaces where we saw people say certain things, but they didn't function the way it should have functioned, or we saw a facade, and then people run with that, right? And so then you watch them start putting now, people, they show facades and they show perception on social media or all those type of things. We like, hey, we're gonna have conversations about some real stuff, but we wanted to really push in a space, Doc, where we talk also about, we call it unlimited solutions, right? Like, what's the path forward, right? Because you can diagnose, you can say, here's the symptoms and all that, I get, the reason I was pushing a lot on this whole notion around this issue between Black and white and advanced classes is because the reality is, like, the confidence for the kid to take that, and integration to me is a good thing. But I know that integration comes at a cost sometimes, because it doesn't always equal that the kid at the lowest end, right, or certain minority kids get the same type of access, because you find people are limiting access in a lot of different ways. And a lot of educators and people know that, but they don't talk about that. And sometimes that access is created within the school, right? Like, I tell people, if I said to you when I sat in schools and I watched, like, it didn't matter if the people were the same color or the same this or whatever their thing is, like, they would be the first one to tell you who can do it, who can't.
Well, and I think too, you brought up a great point, Dr. Taylor, about the fact that we ourselves, you have to score this in order to be placed in that. Yeah. And then they also do that. Let's call a spade. Let's keep it 100. They sometimes also place only individual specific students in those courses because they count towards school grade. Mm-hmm. And because it counts towards school grade, I want a specific student in that course that's going to pass the test at the end of the year.
I can say my school's an A,
then I can say my school is an A.
Or, a game.
We're all playing this game of, like, I want to make sure that I get a certain amount of points per kid because it's going to move the needle in a certain way.
So we say all that to say, right? Let's talk about some possibilities and solutions. Tell us some unlimited things from your perspective that you think that whether you're leaders or you're in different spaces in education should think about, or even at the university level, right? Because we talk to also folks now in the K-12 space, but we also talk to folks at the university level that said, like, hey, we just want these folks to have these kids ready. We want them to be workforce developed. Like help those, like help us. Like, what are the things that you're hopeful for? What do you see, and what are some things that are great, especially in an era of great technology and all that going on?
Oh my goodness, great question. I think that the first thing that pops to my head is cultural competency, right? So we're talking about integration, and we're talking about putting kids, certain types of kids, Black, brown, socioeconomically depressed, into spaces where they haven't been, with teachers who haven't taught those kind of kids. Just placing and dropping kids in spaces is not the solution, right? Mm-hmm. As an organization, you have to invest in those teachers to ensure that they have the cultural competency and understanding that they're going to do right by those kids, and that those kids are going to be in a safe space, and that sorry.
I was going to say cultural competency is a very dangerous word now in today's politics.
And, you don't want to be too woke now,
And let me tell you, cultural competency, keeping that safe space for those kids who, because, I mean, one thing that I experienced definitely are parents who are parents of kids who are Black, browns, free and reduced lunch, who have fear about going to a space that's not where they have traditionally been, right? That teacher won't be able to handle my kid, that my kid will be the only or one or two or three Black kids in that space. Like, so giving them the confidence that we're investing in that with our training and with our administrators and all those things. I also think that for me, one of the keys that unlocks success for public education that is so rarely touched is our calendar, right?
Mm,
That when you look at some of the charters and other innovative approaches, um, being in school 3 weeks out a week or something like that that allows you to have school through the summer. That I remember when I was a principal investing and investigating ways to get as much time for my kids in front of teachers as possible. That the
yeah,
lack
yeah,
of
yeah,
time was just um, such a bear. The using that after school time. Why is our day 6.5 hours, right? All those different things, trying to figure out that and and looking at school improving students' outcomes is not just about the touchy-feely, I feel great, love you type of stuff. It's about how we're using the time of engagement and how we backwards mapping the evaluations that we're also concerned about, those those
right,
those assessments back to what we're doing every single day. Um, I think that the time and the number of days of school and just being so locked in to the general math of being successful as a school leader is just so underrated. I remember, doing presentations as a superintendent, the old one with the fishbowl with 180, gumballs in there, and taking out the days that are being wasted. Oh, this is the day before winter break. This is the day after spring break. Taking
Yeah.
all those, right, right, right. This is the day the lights went out. This is the day we
yeah,
had the
yeah,
water leak. Right now, you have 160 days, right? After you
right,
take out
right,
all, and just trying to really encourage and hold everyone accountable for the time that we have these
yeah,
kids and making sure that it's worthwhile, not just for a score on the assessment, but for the students' success and them moving forward beyond our school walls.
yeah.
Um, that's just a couple of things, but there are just so many. There are just so many.
So, Doc, listen, we could be talking about this for a couple hours. We really enjoyed that conversation, the conversation you had. But our time is up, and so we're gonna have to end it. But a couple of things we wanted to share with you before we end with our audience is one, you got to promise us you're gonna come in person and kick it with us. Definitely, because we really think there's even more stuff we could talk about because we really enjoyed the conversation.
I'd love
Um,
to.
and then the other part too is, what we really, at least I could speak on some of the thoughts that were thought provoking for me was like around the culture and the context and all those things is like, we have tough issues in K-12 that people don't see, right? They think it's as simple as just send your kid to school, right? And it should be that easy, right? But what you learn is when we started doing this podcast, like there's a clash of education and culture, unfortunately, that people in school systems have to manage in a way to bring people together in order for a community to kind of move its work together. And so I always think about that, the complexity of that, which I think is always it's, I don't know if it's called the fun part, but it's always the interesting part. If I could if I could be correct about it. So
Yeah. And I think too, like we've heard this multiple times now, is that there is a belief that as long as my kid's school is doing okay, then I'm good.
yeah,
But the reality is that there are so many more nuances that are going on throughout that school district. And while your kid and that school may be doing well, there are still disparities that are happening within that school, whether you know that or not. And there's a lot of disparities happening within the district. And how do we come together as a community so that these schools aren't so segregated or aren't experiencing the challenges that they're experiencing to that magnitude? So,
Doc, that's all we got for you today. We really thank you. Any last word before we end?
share a little bit about your book. Share your book,
Yep,
please.
yep, yep.
Oh, well, just first of all, thank you. This has just been so inspiring for me and fun. You all do a marvelous job, and I'm again just honored to be a part of it. And for those who want to know more about me or more about the work that we're doing, and teamtaylorleadership.com, and you can learn more about the work that we've done. My book, right, is The Courage to Lead with Integrity for Equity. The Courage to Lead with Integrity for Equity. And I hope that folks see that just that title and understand the importance of your courage for the success of all those kids who we really have the honor and pleasure of serving. And that's been my life, right? I was a public educator for 28 years, and I've been doing support for schools now for about a year and a half. And it's just, I live, breathe, and sleep school calendar, right? Like, even though we're here now in August, I can feel the heart palpitations of school getting ready to start, right? We're all ready to start, right? So, so happy to be with you, and thank you again for the opportunity.
No, well, we appreciate you, Dr. Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Ronald Taylor, we appreciate him for coming. If you like our show, you like the show, please, and you want to give contributions or anything like that, please don't hesitate to contact us, and make sure that you share, like, subscribe to our podcast. We're on podcast, LinkedIn, TikTok, you name it, all the platforms. We'll also put Dr. Taylor's handles in there and all that stuff. And if you have questions for Dr. Taylor, let us know in the comments. We can always forward it to him. One of the nice things that we've been doing is, for all of the guests that come on, is always we send your comments directly to them and then let you connect with them. I know sometimes whether it's school districts or organizations or whatever have these questions, and so we always send that to them. We go from there. But make sure you stay tuned. We have a lot more bangers to come in. Unlearned Unlimited. That's our show.
Unlimited, 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 unlimited.